Hello everyone, I'm here today to do a video about the Wainwright Prize for Conservation, and I have read all the winners of this prize, and I wanted to talk a little bit about them and review them and see my views on the prize as a whole. The prize has been there for a while, but the conservation category, which is the one that is the most interesting to me, started in 2020, and this was their first winner, which is Rebirding by Benedict MacDonald, and this is about the population of birds in Britain mostly, and how the ways that Britain is treating their nature affects what the birds do, as opposed to other countries around Europe, for example, where the nature is a little bit less manicured. And there is some photos in the middle that kind of show like this was how the countryside looked 100 years ago, and this is how it looks now. So it has been cleaned up a lot, and that means less insects, which means less birds, and birds have been kind of isolated in little parts, and so Britain is losing a lot of their bird population and bird species, and this becomes especially apparent when birding has become a hobby that many people have taken over in the last few years, and so it discusses both the contrast of people wanting to see birds, but at the same time birds disappearing from their environment because of the way that they have been treated in nature. I found it very interesting, the facts and the holistic picture in terms of nature, and not just like, I don't know, chasing birds kind of thing, and how the whole environment affects birds in particular, and the techniques that have been applied to trying to rebird areas, like taking populations that have disappeared, taking that species from somewhere else and reintroducing them to their environment. Or this talks very positively about the Netherlands and how they have just there are parts of the Netherlands and basically they have done nothing. They have introduced the species and do nothing, let them fly, let them die, and it seems to be working well. And our instinct to intervene all of the time doesn't necessarily always get the best results. So there are a lot of interesting discussions in this in terms of rebirding and rewilding in general, which I found very interesting. However, I did find that the book was a little bit too focused for my liking on Britain in particular, and I understand it's a British prize, so that's what happens, and I don't think this is less interesting because of that. In general, less important. It's just less widely appealing. So yeah, I like this one. I didn't love it, but I don't think it's the fault of the book. It's more of a combination of the book and me sort of situation. Similar with the winner of 2021, which was Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. I don't know. I was eyeing this for a really long time, and I finally picked it up and read it relatively recently. It talks a lot about fungi and the whole different wide species of fungi, but also the characteristics that make them unique. The fact that fungi are in some ways closer to animals than to plants, even though most people think of them as weird plants. And there's also a whole section about lichens and stuff like that, which is interesting again. But also I found it a little bit niche. Like at some point it felt like a bunch of anecdotes of different fungi and things that they can do, rather than a more holistic book about something and yeah, so again, I did like it. I didn't love it as much as I wanted to, but I do think it's a good book, and I understand why many people find it very appealing. But then I think in 2022 is when things started to change for this prize, and it became like a lot more my style. The first one of these books, the winner of 2022, was Eating to Extinction by Dan Saladino, and I did really like this. And again, this goes through different traditional foods of different countries and different cultures that are like very specific to that place. So for example, it talks about the honey, which is a very specific honey in this very specific part of Tanzania. It talks about wheat, barley, and sort of cereals and fruits and vegetables that are almost lost because they are not the like widespread things that people do. They also talk about this like half fermented fish that they have in the Faroe Islands and Iceland, and weird things like that that are very very traditional foods, and they are very like the variety of foods and species of plants and animals that we eat is actually very very limited. Monocrops have been developed very much, and that has reduced our biodiversity a lot. And this book kind of goes through different ways of doing things, and I have seen the criticism of that this book, that it just goes through different foods. It organizes it in categories like wild, cereal, vegetable, meat, fish, fruits, cheese, alcohol, stimulants, and it goes through every single one of those things and normally gives 3 examples of things that are traditional in those categories from all around the world. And I can see how it can feel like a catalog of different things, but it does have like a section before and I think after each part that kind of explains the context a little bit more, and in the chapters themselves it also gives a little bit more of the context in some of them, and I found it very interesting. I think it's maybe also relatively niche for people that are really interested in food culture and like how the way we eat affects the planet. But I am one of those people, so this did appeal to me. I think it was very well done, and I think it comes across like as the bigger picture of the point that we do need to increase our biodiversity. We do have to protect the traditional grains and cereals and fruits and vegetables that were ancient to the regions that we live in, and that's also part of like the exciting thing about traveling used to be, that you get to try these very different foods and very different cuisines and grains and things that you could never find wherever you lived, and that has been so much more homogenized over the past years, and it is worth trying to conserve that biodiversity by whichever means are relevant. And yeah, I found it very interesting because, as I said, I am quite interested in the food system that we have. I am vegan, and I think that does give a wider context to this book, in the sense that I have personally thought quite deeply about the way I eat and how it affects the world, and I've made my choices to try to minimize that impact. And this gives me other perspective on how else these things can be tackled. So yeah, I found it very interesting. Winner for 2023 was The Lost Rainforests of Britain by Guy Shrubsole, and this basically talks about how we always think about rainforests like the Amazon, but actually rainforests are loosely defined as forests where it rains a lot, and that used to be Britain for a long time, but wild nature again has been reducing in general in civilized countries like in Europe and in Britain. I think the US has a lot more land, so they have less of a problem with that. But also in Asia, natural areas are diminishing now because population is exploding. So it does. This book kind of talks mostly of Britain, but also a little bit of other parts on how that is being reduced and the effects that is having in not only the nature but also the culture of the place. And this at the beginning I thought it was going to be reductive, the way that Rebirding is. It's not exactly reductive, but like niche. But actually the perspective and the talks felt more relevant in a global scale, in a bigger conversation. So I was surprised by how much I like this. And then the last one, the one that won in 2024, might be my favorite of the bunch. Eating to Extinction and this one are probably my favorites, and that is Blue Machine by Helen Czerski, the first woman to win this prize, by the way. So cool. But yeah, this one is a look at the sea, and most books that I have seen on the topic of the sea normally focus on the life inside the sea, so like the fish and the corals and the algae and all of that. And this does touch on that, but it also touches on like ocean people, so Polynesians and things like that. But it's mostly about the physics of the ocean, and the author is a physicist, and you can see that. It talks about how the ocean is warming and why it's warming, and how the physics behind that work, how the physics of currents work, and what warming is doing to the currents, and what effects that have in the wider world. It talks about the how the different things that are changing in the ocean affects, for example, sounds, and how they go through the ocean, and how, for example, ships are making the ocean very noisy, and how that affects whales. It goes into a lot of things from a very physics perspective, and I think that's what I loved about it, because I love physics. So I think it is very approachable. You don't have to be a physicist to look at this and understand what it's saying. But I don't think I have ever seen such a deep look at the ocean from a just like physics point of view. There's a chapter called The Anatomy of the Ocean, and it feels like that. It feels like she's treating the ocean as this one life thing that has all these different complex aspects, and how they affect each other, and how it works, how the ocean works. And yeah, I found it very fascinating. I think it's super well written. The author is a very, very good writer. I also like that she acknowledges that even though she doesn't belong to the ocean people or the Polynesian culture, they are very rich with knowledge about the ocean that we don't have, and she has a lot of respect for them. And I also really enjoyed that acknowledgement from the author, because yeah, that's also often not an aspect that is taken into account in books about the ocean and climate change. uh, so yeah, I really, really enjoyed this. I would recommend to anybody. And yeah, as I said, I think it's probably the favorite of the 5 so far, but I think that as a whole, it's a very interesting prize. I think this one appeals to me more than the nature writing one, because the nature writing one is very British based and very British focused. I read 1 or 2 of those books and just didn't appeal to me, but this one I think has a much broader appeal, and I think that I enjoyed all of the books. I mean, as I said, some of them were more my wheelhouse than others, but I enjoyed all of them, and it's definitely a prize that I want to look more into. I don't think I am interested enough to read like short lists or long lists, because I think nature books in a shortlist. Like if you have 6 nature books to read in a month, it's a lot, but I can browse the list to see if something is appealing to me, and definitely I would continue to read the winners of the Wainwright Prize for Conservation as they come out. I think they come in September, the winners, around September. So I'll definitely keep an eye on that. Let me know if you have followed this prize, if you have read any of these books, if you like them or not. And until next video, bye!